What's up? Welcome to Cameron+Deanna. My name is Cameron. If you're watching on Twitch or YouTube, happy that you're here checking it out. If you are on YouTube, don't forget to leave a comment in the description with your favorite book of this year. Last week we went through and ranked the 54 games that I played last year. Sorry, my camera looks really wonky. I don't know. I think it's fine. This looks like it's like haphazard. Oh yeah, there we go. I see the problem. And so we'll leave it. It's fine. We went and ranked the 54 games 44 games that I played in 2024. And this week we are going to be going and ranking the 57 books that I read this year. And so really excited. As kind of some general caveats, I'll try to add stuff to the description if you're watching on YouTube after the live stream. A handful of these were part of the book club over on One Geek 411. So there are some of these that you can find a much more detailed explanations for what's going on. Others of them are just ones that I read on my own. And so we'll kind of talk about those as we go through them and kind of get through the vibes. Trying to think what else. Also, as I said last time, and this is the completely objective and correct version and listing of all of these books. There I will hear no comments and no callouts. This is correct. If your opinion differs, great, good for you. Would love to hear about it in the comments section. And so, like I said, we'll be going through these. In a way, we kind of experienced this in a little bit in the games section, where there are some games that are so like radically different from each other that it's hard to like put them in the same categories. We're going to also deal with that exact same problem here where it comes to books. We're going to have books that are so radically different that it's going to be a challenge to actually like put them in the same categories. And so we're going to do our best for that. And then I also want to shout out there's a link in the description to my story graph, which is what I use to track all the books that I've read and stuff like that. I need to get better at leaving reviews for it, but did a little bit of that today as I was getting ready. So if you also use Storygraph, feel free to friend me or follow me, whatever the term is over there on Storygraph, and we can go through and chat books together. And so, real quick description of the tier list. Then we're going to go take a little quick look at Storygraph. So we're going to do our normal S through D tier. I'm going to attempt to not add additional tiers. We're going to see how it goes. And we're going to do something that I don't usually do with tier lists, where I'm going to try to actually rank things within the tier that they are in. Normally I just do the like everything in S is equivalent. But for this, I'm going to try doing it a different way, and we're going to kind of see how that goes. And then, I'm trying to think I don't think I had anything else specific on that tier list. I should also call out, I am going to be using a separate window that y'all will not see, that it has like descriptions of the books in case I need to remember stuff. So just as a heads up, if I am reading, that is where I am reading from. It should be fun. And so let's take a quick look. Storygraph does a great job like tracking your stats. So like here is my goal of I wanted to read 50 books this year. Ironically, I had not paid attention and didn't know you could do this, I think, until I had read my 51st book of the year. So like my goal was already met. But hey, I'm excited. I completed my goal of reading 50 books this year. And so Storygraph, I love this breakdown between pages and hours. I obviously do a lot of audiobooks, as you can tell from this breakdown. I think I did the math earlier, and this was like 17 days of audiobooks if you were to like go end to end. I do live that 2x speed life, which helps me out a lot. And then I loved these moods. This is a fun thing where people can kind of like vote on the moods of the books and stuff like that. So my biggest mood is adventurous, which like I love fantasy. I love adventure. Like that makes a lot of sense. Mysterious is my next one. And then my third highest is dark, which kind of surprised me, but like, I think there's a lot of like witchy books this year. And those kind of got the dark tag, even though the like subject matter is not necessarily dark. But and then followed by emotional, lighthearted, funny, tense, hopeful, and yeah. And then from there we just kind of get around to smaller ones. And so this is a stat that I thought was interesting. So of the audiobooks that I did, 8 were longer than 16 hours. 20 yeah, and then 11 were less than 8 hours, and then 20 of them were between 8 and 16, which is why, and this works really well for my commute, which is why a lot of them fall into this range of like, I will specifically look for audiobooks in this range so that I can knock them out easily on my commutes. And so that's a big part of like this giant chunk. Over here, fiction versus nonfiction. I don't like nonfiction very much. In fact, I was looking at this earlier. I would argue that 2 of the 4 nonfiction books that I have here are actually fiction, and they're miscategorized because they are TTRPG books. And so while they are not fiction in the sense of like they're not necessarily stories, they are definitely not nonfiction, IMO. And then here's our breakdown of genres. And again, you can kind of see some trends here. Based on adventure being like my biggest tag, and then fantasy being my biggest genre, where like that's just under half of the total books that I read this year fall into fantasy. And so, and of course, books can have multiple genres. And so, but yeah, so I'm really excited with this. Some cool stuff. I definitely want to get a little bit more diversity for these categories for next year. I will be joining a second book club next year for the first time in my life. The first Geek Book Club was the first book club I'd ever been a part of. And then I'll be joining a second one next year that should be leading to a pretty interesting variety of books. I'm sure I'll talk about that throughout the stream. And then here, the last thing I want to talk about here is most read authors. Shout out to V.E. Schwab. If you've known me for a while, you know that Schwab is my favorite author. We'll talk about 10 of her books in this ranking. And I've been working on 100%ing Schwab's catalog. I feel like I'm almost done with her non-kid focused books. And so we are working our way through that. Followed by Marissa Meyer, which is basically one series. And then Matt Forbeck, who is the lead author for Marvel Multiverse TTRPG. And so then we have some other ones that we'll kind of talk about a little bit as we go. I don't think those, yeah. So that's my story graph. Again, if you are interested in doing and being friends or whatever on Storygraph, please head on over there. You can find the link down in the description, and we can use this to chat books. So let's get our year started. We're going to go through these in the order that I read them. Asterisk, we're going to try to keep series together, and we'll kind of talk about them as a whole series. So as the example over here, we have Cinder, Scarlet, there's a gap, and then I finish the series here. And so we're going to talk about all of those at once. They won't necessarily be ranked the same, but we will talk about them all at once. And so that's kind of the only exception to the order thing. Like another one of here is a magic steeped in poison, and then a venom dark and sweet. Like there's a big gap here. So we are going to do our best to kind of hit those series as we go. Okay, so starting off the year was A Psalm for the Wild Built. This was our January book for First Geek. Our theme for the beginning of the year was we each picked a book that we had actually read in 2023, and then that was our first 3 book club books. And so this was the book that Shanine brought. And so this is a very cool, it's solar punk, I believe is the genre. And so it's like futuristic, techie, but it is about like balance and between like people and nature. And one of the interesting things about this book is it follows this character who is basically like a traveling tea person. They're called a tea monk. And so they basically travel village to village and then act almost like a counselor for these people. And so it's a really interesting. And then this person kind of ends up going through some life stuff and ends up finding a robot, because the whole premise in this world is that there was all these automatons, and all of a sudden one day they all woke up and became sentient. And so since it's solar punk, everything was fine. And all the robots basically were just like, hey, we're going to go figure out who we are and live on our own. And so this is like the first contact between humans and robots in like centuries. And so it's a really cool premise. I like solar punk a lot as a genre. And then the next book that I read is A Prayer for the Crown Shy, which is the sequel to this book. And so it kind of, I think, picks up like literally immediately after A Psalm for the Wild Built ends, and picks up with the main characters, Dex and Moscap, exploring kind of the fallout of what is this like when the only known robot to interact with humans in hundreds of years. And so they kind of spend their time traveling around and experiencing the world. One of the call-outs that I had made during book club for Psalm for the Wild Built was that it's funny that, or we had made, I don't remember if I actually said this or we just all agreed, is that it's funny that like the robot in this story is the most human character. And like has this really cool like emotional understanding of people as they don't understand. And so these are both also pretty short. Prayer for the Crown Shy is 4 hours for the audiobook, and they both are actually about 4 hours. And so these were ones that like did A Psalm for the Wild Built and immediately went into A Prayer for the Crown Shy. I think of the two of these, I think Prayer for the Crown Shy has some like interesting world building, just because you actually get to see a bit more of like the capital and like the bigger cities, whereas Psalm for the Wild Built is a lot more like van life. But I think I'm going to put A Psalm for the Wild Built as an A and A Prayer for the Crown Shy as a B. And that's where we will start off the day. If we do end up doing halves, and I end up changing my mind on not adding more categories, we will we might end up bumping Prayer for the Crown Shy to a B+. So, but we'll see. Our next book is The Wager, A Tale of Shipwreck, Mutiny, and Murder. It's one of the few nonfiction books that I read, as this is about like an actual like shipwreck that occurred. And it's about this basically this party of, I believe, British sailors who tried to go around the Horn of Brazil, the bottom part of Brazil, and it ends up not going well, and they shipwreck. And so they end up having to figure out how to make their way home. It does not work out well for a whole lot of the people that are there. And they end up, I think it says 6 months later, they eventually finally make it back. Maybe it's longer than that. I just am not remembering. Try, thank you so much for that lurk. Oh, and I should say, Locke, thank you for being part of Early Gang. And so this was really interesting because as a nonfiction book, like this really reads like fiction, just because we're so used to this idea of like pirates and that mythos. And so this is definitely like a fun recommendation. And it's very interesting to think about it, because like I said, you could very easily have told me, like if you wouldn't have told me this was nonfiction, I would have assumed it was a fictional work. I think this is also a B for me. Oh, I guess I should talk about my categories now that we're getting some books in here. So the idea for me is that these are the best books, the ones I would recommend the most to just about anyone. A are books that are, I should say an S book is not perfect. It is just a book that I really like. A is a great book. I really enjoyed it. It was a fun read. B is a good book. C is a book that's just kind of fine. And then D is what I would say is a bad book. I'll try to, as we talk through it, I'll try to describe why I think it is bad. Yeah, so that's kind of my my breakdown of how I think about the specific tiers themselves. So speaking of S tier, go ahead and get that statement out of the way. Josh, thank you so much. Belated Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you as well. Thank you for coming by. Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. If you know me, and have talked to me about books, this is a V.E. Schwab book. It is the only book I have finished and immediately wanted to restart. While I like Schwab's other series, this as a standalone work is so amazing. It's a very interesting take on this idea of a woman makes a deal with the devil and then has to live with the consequences of that deal for the rest of her life. And so it's all about finding the actual deal itself, finding what's going on there, and this relationship that forms between the woman and this person who is the darkness. And so I love this book. We'll reference this, I'm sure, throughout this, but this has become the book that defines me when I talk about books with people. So next up, we have the Marvel Multiverse tabletop role-playing game core rulebook. When I get new games, I'm the person that likes to actually read through the rules, not necessarily in an attempt to memorize everything, but just I like to know what's actually going on. I have a joke that I've made to a lot of people of most people don't actually want to play D&D. They just want to play a cool fantasy game with their friends. And that's why most people have never read the Player's Handbook. And so with all of that said, I really like the Marvel Multiverse game. I very briefly ran a lunch game at my old job where we would play through it. They picked the most eclectic group of characters of Morbius, Daredevil, and Mystique. And we played for a month and a half, once a week at lunch. It was a very slow progress just because we literally only had our lunch breaks to play, but that was a lot of fun. And then I've run a couple one-shots, and then in January, I'm hoping to start my actual first in-person play of this book. And so that's kind of the background on what's going on with it. For me, I really like this system from what I have played. I'm excited to dive more into it once we get to the campaign itself. I feel like the game does a good job of explaining the rules and kind of bringing in the differences there. I will say one of the other parts that's really cool is that you can play as the actual Marvel characters, and they have a third of the book is just character sheets. So if you want to play as Spider-Man or as Wolverine or as Black Panther, just to kind of pick some of the characters off the cover, they have stat blocks for those characters. But then they also go through if you want to change how powerful these characters are or build your own characters. There's rules around that as well. I might have a more detailed take on this once I actually get the system into a longer running campaign. So right now I'm going to leave this as an A with the explanation of I probably really love this and it's probably an S for me. But since I haven't played it fully, I am going to skip it for now, or not skip it, but I'm going to not necessarily want to rate it for what I haven't experienced with it. So let's go and find our other Marvel Multiverse books that we do have in this. So first off, we have the Deadpool Role Plays The Multiverse. It is a set of, I'm going to just draw, it's not going to be a D, but it is a set of this single adventure. I think they describe as being 3 to 4 sessions that you play through, where you are a group of mercs that are hired by Deadpool to figure out why other mercs are going missing. It has a cool intro comic, and then it has this cool kind of plot that you go through. And so it's a fun little mini adventure from what I've read. I have not played it, so I can't necessarily speak to that side of it. We'll talk about this. Actually, we'll talk about it here. We didn't talk about it with the other stuff. But one of the things that I do not like about this as a like as a thing that you're given, is that Marvel Multiverse has a rank system instead of a level system. So your level or ranks 1 through 6, and this, as well as some of the standalone content, will provides mixed ranked characters. So you just have characters that are objectively weaker than the other ones. And it's like this does it where I think 4 out of the 6 characters it gives you are rank 3 and 2 are rank 2, or maybe it's split 3 and 3, I don't know. But regardless, like, of course you can rank up the characters to be the same rank as the other ones, but like if you play the characters as written, you definitely end up with characters that are just weaker because of that. And so I do not like that as like a system. I would much rather just have every character be the same rank. With the recent Marvel Rivals crossover content they did for Marvel Multiverse, they did a really good job where all of the characters are actually the same rank, or it's something like Hulk, like Bruce Banner and Hulk, that they are different ranks than everybody else because that makes sense for how that character plays. So with that as my big caveat, I'm going to put this as a high B. Hello, there we go. And so I do think this is really cool. Oh, and I'm going to pump. I forget that I said I was going to do it as an actual ranking within the tiers. And so, I'm going to put that as a high B. Next up in the Marvel Multiverse world, we have the Cataclysm of Kang. And then while I'm over here, we're going to also go ahead and grab the X-Men expansion. And so Cataclysm campaign is the published campaign that is available for Marvel Multiverse. It is a single campaign that goes through all 6 of those ranks. And this is what I will be running my group through. And so here, kind of the same challenge that is as the other content of like, I'm reviewing this based on what I have read of it, not what I've actually played, which makes these kind of hard to describe as books. And so I'll say here, the campaign itself seems really interesting. I do have a couple, I don't know if concerns is the right word, but for some of the later objectives, it does seem like there's like here's the problem, how are your players going to figure it out? And I'm not necessarily sure how great the book does of like setting those up for those like big like climactic moments once you get to like your super powerful characters. But maybe that's going to actually be a good thing, and the players will come up with really creative things and solutions. And so like there are some examples that they give in the book of like possible answers. I don't know, maybe they'll be able to figure it out on their own. And so that's really cool. Similar to the core rulebook, this does also have a good chunk of stat blocks when it comes, or character sheets for the new characters that take place. Every rank, so basically this is one campaign with like 6 mini arcs. And then for every one of those 6 mini arcs, if you want to, you could switch to a different character of the corresponding rank. Or you can play one character that ranks up and plays through them, which I think is a really cool conceit. For people that want to both play as Marvel characters, but also want to play as their own. And so it's cool to see those new characters, as well as, of course, the ones that are like plot relevant. So for this, I'm going to also put this in B. I think for now, I am going to put it below or above A Prayer for the Crown Shy. We'll have it in this category. And then we'll see kind of how it shakes out after I play. I could see a lot of this Marvel stuff like getting bumped up to the top just because I really like Marvel. But I'm trying to like check my bias. So now all that said, the fourth like official published thing for Marvel Multiverse is the X-Men expansion. And so while there are like mutants and X-Men characters in the other books, this like really flushes them out. And so one of the things that I really love about this game or this book is, of course, you get stuff like character sheets and plot hooks and all of that. But one of the things that I think is really cool is this adds in like descriptions of like the major X teams. So if you're interested in literally playing a game on the X-Men, this covers like, okay, here's what the X-Men go through. Here's what they represent to like the Marvel canon. And then here's like how someone joins the X-Men. And so they do that for a bunch of the different teams, like New Mutants as well, Exterminators. And so there's some very interesting like ideas of like, here's what like a campaign that would focus on this type of character does. And then each of those sections also, this book kind of functions as like a high level like plot summary of the comics of those characters, which is really cool. It's like obviously the X-Men themselves are the biggest chunk of that, but it is really cool to kind of get a description of some of these lesser known teams that I am not as familiar with, just because I haven't hung out around those comics as much. So this one I'm going to put in an A. I'm going to leave it in this bottom category. And yeah, really like this book. I think it's a really interesting like update. It adds some new powers as well as fleshing out some of the existing ones. And so that is definitely some cool stuff that they are able to bring into the game. And so I'm excited. The next expansion is Spider-Man, which I am obviously super hyped for. So our next book, and so this is like the fourth book that I read chronologically, is How to Lose the Time War, or This Is How You Lose the Time War, which is a very interesting like time travel story, where you have, this is from the actual description, 2 time traveling agents from warring factions working their way through the past begin to exchange letters and fall in love in this thrilling and romantic book from award-winning authors Amal El Sator and Max Gladstone. And so it's a very interesting take on the like enemies to lovers trope, where it's like they're not enemies in the sense they don't get along, like they're enemies in the sense like they're from factions that are literally trying to kill each other. And so this was a very fun book. I don't remember how like this got put on my radar. I don't know if this was a book that we had discussed as a possibility for First Geeks Book Club or what, or if this was just something that like I randomly came across. But like I really enjoyed this book. It's another short one. Audiobook wise, it's just over 4 hours, same as the Psalm for the Wild Built and Prayer for the Crown Shy. And so this is a very fun, like very quick read. I think this is another A for me. I think I'm going to put it over here as our current number 2 for How to Lose a Time War. This is definitely a fun recommendation. This also has some good like representation and stuff like that for how these characters are and stuff like that. And so it's a very fun read, and is very interesting. And so next up we have the Fragile Threads of Power. So this is the 4th book in the Darker Shades of Magic series. It's the first book in the Threads of Power like part of that story. And so this takes a look at basically immediately following the events of the first 3 books and kind of is starting off its own new trilogy. And so a lot of the previous characters still carry through the story here. And then in like traditional Schwab fashion, you have a lot of characters that they're like weaving the narratives together between these different characters as they either explore together and then spread out, or you have characters that are kind of going through journeys on their own, as they kind of deal with the cool magic system of this world. And so I will say one of my only complaints I have about this book is that there's one of the characters that really spins their whole story by themselves, and I wish that they got to connect in with the other characters more. I do think that's something that like I personally would have liked more in this. I'm sure that will happen in the next book in this series, but that's really my only big complaint. And then I will also say this book does introduce Tess, who is one of the new characters that was added, because they were introduced, as I had said. Just kind of repeating myself there, but this adds Tess in, who is one of my favorite characters in this whole series and is possibly one of my favorite characters in all of Schwab's work. And I am really excited about that character. They will probably be showing up in like tabletop RPGs that I run because I really like this character and kind of what they bring to the narrative. So they have a cool representation of like the skill set that can exist in this type of world. And so I'm going to try to not give all of Schwab's book S tier, but this one is also S tier for me. Next up is Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. We did our tier list for First Geek. We did not rank this book just because of the stuff going on with Neil Gaiman. And so just kind of, you can go and look into that if you want to look into it. I'm not going to speak on this too long, but this is an interesting idea for a book. I think it is a fun take on the angels and demons hanging out together. This book is a B for me, kind of through all of that. I think I liked it more than The Wager. But yeah, that's where we're gonna end with Good Omens. Next up, we have Next by Michael Crichton. And so this is the person who wrote the Jurassic Park books. And so this is kind of a similarly themed book, which is a lot less fantastical. And so whereas Jurassic Park looks on the idea of like using DNA to clone things and how that could go wrong, this looks at a similar thing, but it's using the idea of like copywriting DNA or using genes as an excuse for things. And this one, honestly, to me, is a lot scarier than Jurassic Park, just because it's less fantastical. This is stuff like, this book was written in 2006, and by like 2024, like there's a lot of stuff here that like you could kind of see going a lot of the ways that he is warning us about in this book. And so this was a very, again, kind of scary read, but a very fun read in that sense as well, of like, one of the things that science fiction can do so well is like telling us, hey, here are the problems that could occur. And as you'd expect from the person that wrote Jurassic Park, this book does a very similarly good job. And so I think this is going to be, I think this is going to be an S tier for me. I will put it behind the Schwab books, but I do really like this. And like I said, it is scary in the sense of like, I could see this happening. Next up, we have a couple of Dune books with Dune Messiah and then Children of Dune. And so Dune Messiah, and these are the second and third books in the Dune series. And so I had read, over for First Geek, I had read the book Dune for our book club. And then after the movie, I hadn't wanted to read these until the movie, second part of the movie came out, just in case they ended up bringing in any of these plot points. But once that movie came out, I went and read both of these. And so also really interesting because like, these are so radically different in terms of the amount of content. Dune Messiah is a 9-hour audiobook, whereas Children of Dune is 17 hours. And so it's like such a radically different like amount of what goes on. And so from a like high level plot wise, Dune Messiah picks up I want to say a couple decades after Dune 1, and tells a story of a lot of those same characters, and is very much focused on the like family life of everyone that is there. And then Children of Dune is all about the Atreides sons, or kids. I should not say sons, but it's about what goes on with his kids after Paul is out of the picture. And so very interesting. Something that I've heard as like a criticism of the Dune series is that they go off the rails. And I will say like Dune Messiah kind of very much sticks with the same tone, and then Children of Dune goes crazy. There's definitely stuff there that is like, it kind of, I don't want to say retcons the previous books, because it's all written by Frank. So it's not like this is another author coming through, but like there are things there where they're like, they kind of try to explain why specific choices were made in the other books. And it kind of goes crazy, not necessarily in a bad way, but it does kind of go crazy. So I think Dune Messiah for me is a number 2, because I like Paul as a character, and he's more of a prevalent part of that. Children of Dune, I think, is a B. We're going to put here above Good Omens. And so this is another interesting take on those characters. Next up, we have Star Wars: The High Republic Tales of Light and Life. This is a collection of short stories that take place in the High Republic era. And so if you've seen the Acolyte show, this is what takes, that's the time period that these stories take place in. And I do believe there are references to this book or to the books as a whole that happen in Acolyte. And so I will just kind of say generally for this, like the way that they have set up these books is like it's a set of phases for the High Republic series. It's like books, comic books, and then the show Acolyte. And then these are short stories that bridge the gap between, I believe, phases 2 and 3 of that storytelling. And so as someone who picked this up just because I thought it was going to be a light, easy read, I will say probably missed 90% of why stuff here matters because I have not read that other content. And so because of that, as much as I do think this is a cool collection of short stories, I do think that this is a C for me just because this would be like a hard recommend to people that are not like super plugged into this one subset of the Star Wars story. So next up, we have Legends and Lattes. You can see these like D&D themed books back to back. And so Legends and Lattes, the description says, worn out after decades of packing steel and raising hell, Viv, the orc barbarian, cashes out of her warrior's life with one final score. A forgotten legend, a fabled artifact, and an unreasonable amount of hope lead her to the streets of Thune, where she plans to open the first coffee shop the city has ever seen. And so I love this as a concept of like you have this grizzled like orc barbarian that is like battle hardened and like just wants to retire. And how do they do that? They open up a coffee shop. It's so silly. It's so fun. There's a video game coming out next year that has like a similar theme to this, which I'm really excited for. And this is a very like light, fun read as you kind of just talk through or get to like experience this story of what's going on in this new city for this character as they try to bring coffee to the world. And so it's very fun. And it's another example of something that would be so much fun just to plug into your TTRPG setting of like, obviously like your PCs rarely actually survive and get to retire, but this is a fun idea of like, well, what happens when a character gets to retire? Can they interact with someone that gets to retire? And so, yeah, there's a very fun, like building the team aspect here as well as Viv tries to gather, all of the people working for her. And again, it's kind of like a fun building the team or gathering the party, but instead of being gathering to fight, it's gathering to run a latte or run a coffee shop. And so it's very fun in that regard. This is an A for me. Oops, grabbed the wrong thing. That was over here. So this is an A for me. A very fun book. Again, very easy recommendation if you have even if you don't necessarily have like a TTRPG background, you don't have to have like played games to enjoy this. It's just a fun fantasy story. Next up is Dungeons and Drama. And so this is a YA rom-com about this girl named Riley whose dad owns a game shop. And after high school hijinks occurs, she gets grounded and part of that has to work at the shop. And so it's about her trying to balance the things that she's excited for school with actually learning how to play Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that. And so it's an interesting rom-com. There's a very light enemies to lovers here as well. I think this is a B for me. I'm going to put it here below Deadpool. Again, another fun light book that I would definitely recommend to people. It's about an 8-hour audiobook, and so very cool in that regard. It's also, of course, it's a book about people playing tabletop RPGs, which is right up my alley. The next book that we have is Your Blood, My Bones. This is the, I believe, April book club that we did for First Geek. And so this is the second book in the Whispering Dark series, or I say series. It is a connected universe. We're going to actually leave Whispering Dark for later. And since they're not necessarily directly connected as one narrative. And so this follows the story of Wyatt, who after the death of her father is given his farmhouse where a cult used to be that her father was a part of. And it's kind of her learning about the magic that exists in this world, both for her as the person that like is now the owner of this property, but also like of why her father was the person that he was, and then some of the other magics that exist in this world. And so Wyatt has to return, and she ends up meeting back up with some of the friends that she grew up with that her mom took her away from, that are part of this. And so I liked this book a lot. I think this is a high A for me. I think I'm going to put it below how This Is How You Lose the Time War. I liked this one a lot. The whole book basically takes place at like that one property, with the exception of like one section. And so it's a very interesting take on like the supernatural, because while there are like some stakes, the stakes are like always presented through like the main characters literally being the only people around, or the only like not as sketchy people around. And so next up we have A Forest of Vanity and Valor. This is the first book in a series, and it was described to me as from a friend as this is the MCU meets the classic like Arthurian and fabled characters. And so the main character is like literally Robin Hood of like, and he ends up like going and having to live in the woods because the bad sheriff is bad, and like frames him. And so he has to actually go and hide out, and he ends up gathering like a band of merry men. And then there ends up being some connections in it to these other stories throughout it. I'll put this book in the like just fine camp. We'll talk a little bit more once we get to the Cinder series about this idea of like adapting other stories, and then like kind of bringing in like that framework into your narrative. Like I definitely feel like for this book, it didn't grab me a ton, and it's something that like had I not done the audiobook for it, which is only 6 hours, I honestly don't know if I would have finished this. And yeah, it's not bad. It just definitely did not grab me. I think it's a C, and it's below Tales of Life and Light. Yeah, just like isn't my favorite take on this like trope that I read this year. And so, yeah, so that is, sorry, lost my tabs. That is A Forest of Vanity and Valor. Next up, we have City of Ghosts, and then we have its sequel, Tunnel of Bones, and then we have Bridge of Souls. This is a trilogy of works from Schwab, talking about this girl named Cass. And so the basic plot is that she has died and then has been brought back to life, which is a little bit of a trend in Schwab's books, and that kind of gives her some powers. And so this is about her coming to get to know who she is, and then her parents are like amateur ghost hunters who end up like have like written books and stuff and end up getting a TV show. And so like the premise of these 3 books is that it is Cass like traveling the world with her parents. And then she ends up going to all of these like haunted places where she can actually see the ghosts. And so it's about her having to figure out what is going on there. Of these, I'm trying to like just a quick skim back over through like the descriptions if there's anything else I wanted to call out. And so I guess I could say the first book, do we have where they go to? We do not have that in the description. And so, so we have Scotland for City of Ghosts. Tunnel of Bones is in Paris, and then Bridge of Souls is in New Orleans. And so you kind of get this world traveling take on the stories and on the different like ghost stories that take place or that are being lived out within this world. Of those, I do think the Paris one, Tunnel of Bones, is my favorite of these. And so I'm going to put that as an A. We're going to put it above Dune Messiah, and I'm actually going to bump up Legends and Lattes. And so we're going to put that as an A. City of Bones, I think, is a high B. We'll put that as our first one. And then Tunnel of Bones, I think, or Bridge of Souls, sorry, is a lower B. I do like the New Orleans aspect of it. I think we're going to put it here above Children of Dune. And so it is a fun like take on that type of stuff. This type of like ghost stories and things like that. I probably would have been more interested in these stories if it was a duology. But I don't necessarily think the 3 stories were as necessary. You're like reading them all in relatively quick succession. They're not as differentiated as some of the other books. But I will say these are also Schwab's like young adult targeted series. And so it's a little different there. Next up, we have House of X, Powers of X. This is a collection of the 12 total comics, 6 of each, that kicked off the Krakoan era of X-Men. I read this after X-Men 97, like really reignited my like hype for like X-Men as a whole, but like comics. And we'll talk a lot more about the X-Men throughout like the later portions of this list as well. But yeah, so I picked this up, and this is an amazing read. Without like burying the hatchet, like I think this is an S tier for me behind Fragile Threads. The premise of these as a collection is that you're alternating between the 2 sets of stories, which I assume is how these were released. And so you're seeing like these different connections of the like and how these 2 like sets of stories tie in together, and as Krakoa is established in this. So with House of X not being as actiony, and then Powers of X being more actiony, at least if I'm remembering which ones is which a bit more. And so I really like these. I like the Krakoan take on X-Men of like giving them an established nation. So it's not just, this one team or this one group. It's like they're a literal nation. And so the X-Men allegory is obviously very fitting in a lot of different ways. And so I highly recommend this. It's a great read. And yeah, even if you don't necessarily go and read more X-Men after this, like it's a very great collection of X-Men stories. Next up, we have our duology for A Magic Steeped in Poison, as well as a Venom Dark and Sweet. And so I'm a sucker for a good like tournament story, and that's what A Magic Steeped in Poison is. This is a series very much inspired by like Eastern narratives, where the idea is that like drinking tea is like a literal form of magic. And so how you prepare that tea can like literally give people powers or let you like see into their mind. So whereas A Prayer for the Crown Shy, like it's tea, but it's like are you basically going and acting as a counselor? For these, it's like the people that use this type of magic are like assassins, spies, but also are healers and things like that. And so this one's really interesting as the main character. Ning is brought into this tournament for basically who's going to be the Shinong Shu. I think I'm pronouncing that right. But who's going to be like the master tea maker for this nation. And so she gets brought into it in the first one. And then in the second one, picks up Venom Dark and Sweet picks up pretty quickly after the events of the first one. And then deals with the fallout of that story, which I don't want to go into too much spoilers for, but this also then builds in a bit more of the world building for like what is going on in like the metaphysics of this world, which is stuff that I always think is very cool. Of like, if you give me like a cool magic system, like what's the theology, what's the actual, like, how does this affect the daily life in that other sense, not just for this one individual character or set of characters. And so these are both very fun reads. I don't necessarily know if I could say which one I like more than the other, but I will say they are both good. I think I am going to put them, just for the sake of like a cop-out, I'm going to put them both in A tier back to back. Is that the spot I like them? Yeah, we'll leave them there for now. We might go and do a pass through later to see what we think. Our next comic, our next book is another comic, and this is Spider-Verse Across the Multiverse. So this is a collection of like 14 different comics, it looks like. And this is basically the introduction stories for a whole bunch of spider people leading into a like big event that they all have to go through together. And so this is fun, but I will say the biggest complaint that I have is that it's pretty samey. So like there are some spider people in here that are like your standbys that you know. But then there's other ones that are like very silly. Like there's one inspired by like Disney princesses and stuff like that. But because as a collection, this is just like intro stories for these characters. There's not necessarily a lot of like major connections. Some of them just kind of feel as they are. And some of them, like Spider-Rex, makes an appearance here. But like, so they're all like that silly side, but honestly, there are some that I kind of wish that they just weren't in this, and instead we had gotten like a deeper story on some of the other characters. And so because of that, this is a C for me. We'll put it at the top of C, but I do think it is there. This would be a hard recommendation just because it feels like a lot that like is just basically an anthology, collecting all of these different spider stories. Next up, we have Life Death, or X-Men Life Death, technically, by Chris Claremont, one of the classic X-Men stories, with the original ones being published in the 60s. And we read this over on First Geek for our book club over there. This is a book that I brought to us because Life Death plays a part in the X-Men 97 story, and I thought it would be fun for us to come and take a look at this. Honestly, this book has become a bit of a punchline for us. If you're also a First Geek person, you'll have heard us reference this book a lot. This book does the cardinal sin of collecting comics, which is this should not have been a collection of these comics. The Life Death story is just 2 out of the 4 comics in this book. And then one of the other comics, like Storm, gets mentioned. Also, and it's hard to tell because of how the picture cut off, but this is Storm on the cover. But Life Death is focused on her. So in one of the other ones, Storm gets mentioned, and then in the 4th comic, it just has nothing to do with the wider story of what is going on. And then while I don't want to necessarily like factor price in to the overall like recommendation, like this is very expensive for what I would say is not a very good collection. And so this is actually going to be our first D tier. I do think the 2 Life Death comics are very good, but I would really struggle to recommend this as a collection to anyone. Next up, we have our next... Oh, and I will say with that, I do think X-Men 97 does the Life Death story better than these comics do. So on top of all of that, yeah, I feel like the X-Men 97 makes good changes to this comic in a way that like plays out better than what is actually here, and like, but it's better than the actual source material, which like is not always something that is like easy to do, but So our next one is going to be another TTRPG book. This is Candela Obscura. This is from Darrington Press, the people or Critical Role's publishing arm. And so this is their kind of like spooky Victorian setting. This is a very narrative heavy. It's similar to Blades in the Dark if you have played that system. And I will say one of their big they list their inspirations in this book, and it references the Darker Shades of Magic series from V.E. Schwab. So like, let's go. I'm in. So that's very fun that it kind of that Schwab gets to have a reference in this. And then, this as or one of the biggest things going from like playing D&D as and Pathfinder as my primary TTRPGs to playing Candela is that Candela is very narrative focused to the point that like there's not initiative, there's not like movement speed. It's like describe what you want to do, and the narrator, the GM, will tell you what you need to roll, or if you even need to roll to go through and play this. And so, or to go through and make that actual play. And so it's very fun. We are still very early on in our campaign for this. We've probably played like 6 or so sessions. And so compared to like Marvel Multiverse that I've only gotten to play a handful, like we've actually made some pretty interesting progress here. And this is a very cool setting. I really like the general world that they built here. They do a good enough job describing the different regions and kind of like what are the main people or things that you would find in this region if you were to go there, without trying to necessarily like map out on this street, this person lives in this house. And so I do think that they do a good job kind of walking that line. And then this kind of a more broad complaint than just the book. I wish there was a bit more here as like here's like a sample campaign or sample sessions that you can run. I do not believe there's any of that in this book. Someone can correct me if I am wrong there, but that is something. They do some like example sessions of like, but like there's not like, here's an adventure, and I don't believe there's any that have been published, but I do think that this is interesting, and it's going to be a B for me. We're going to put it, it's somewhere in like this area. I think we're going to put it below Kang. And so it's a cool setting, a cool gameplay style. If you've played this wears its inspirations for like the other TTRPG systems on its sleeve. And so if you have, like played those other systems, I don't know if this would make you want to switch to this, but I do like this as a world. Okay. Next up, we have the Adventures of Amina Al-Sarafi. So this is kind of going to the opposite of The Wager. This is like a very fantastical pirate story. This was another First Geek Book Club book, and I did the audiobook for this, and honestly, it might be the best audiobook I have ever listened to. Like, they did a great job. It is primarily told from Amina's perspective, but when they do bring in other characters into kind of like the frame narrative of what's going on, it is really cool and very well done. And I like that a lot as a system, or as like a system for telling the story. And like I said, this audiobook is probably my favorite audiobook, period. And so kind of with saying that, it's pretty obviously going to be an S tier. We're going to put it as our current number 3. And this kind of hits some of the same vibes as like Legends and Lattes, where like you have this pirate captain who is retired, but then gets kind of pulled back in for one more job, and has to go through and like regather her crew, redo all of these things, so that she can kind of accurately provide for her kid. I guess that's the best way to say that. And then, like I said, this is one of the explanations that the author had said for this is like, it's intended to be historical fiction until it is extremely fiction. And so like it's very well researched and things like that. It's trying to actually tell a story of pirates. And I should say this is in the Indian Ocean, which is also a very interesting and different take on pirates versus what I think myself and most like Western people are used to, where we're used to Caribbean pirates. This is Indian Ocean pirates. And so very interesting, different like cultural stuff there that I think is really fun. And so this is definitely a big recommend from me. Next up, we have the Lunar Chronicles series of, I guess, 6 books, with Stars Above being kind of like epilogues and stuff. And so I referenced this when we were talking about the Forest of Vanity and Valor. So this Lunar Chronicles series is a take on like the classic princess fairy tales, of course popularized through Disney. So like Cinder is Cinderella, Scarlet is Red Riding Hood / the Big Bad Wolf, Crest is Rapunzel, Winter is Snow White, and then Fairest is the evil stepmother. And so this is a very cool take on these like different, like on this story. This is another like YA focused story, age-wise. This takes place in the future where there's really only like 5 or 6 countries on Earth, and then people live on the moon. And then kind of through that, the people on the moon have gained powers. And so this follows the story of Cinder. And one of the things that I like about this book or this series is that while like each book is titled after the main protagonist of that story, it is really a story about like the same core group of characters as they go through all of them. And so like you might not be introduced to a character until a later book, but like Cinder is present as the main character for all of the books, and then she meets up with Scarlet, and then Scarlet becomes a main character, and that carries through the rest of the series. And so you never like are abandoning these characters when the story ends. And so this is also a little bit of like a cyberpunk story. Like there's androids, there's a plague that is going on, and so some very interesting like political, like cyberpunk, all of those kinds of things getting pulled in. It's a little dystopian. It's not like necessarily as dystopian as something like Hunger Games would be, but like there's a little bit of that aspect as well. And so I think broadly speaking, I'm going to take the coward's way out on this, just like I did with Magic Steeped in Poison, where I'm going to roughly group all of these together. Just because I don't necessarily have super strong feelings. I also, as y'all saw before I grouped these, like read these basically in clumps. Of it was like Cinder and Scarlet, then I read some other books, and then I read Crest through Stars Above in a chunk. And so that definitely plays into like a bit of the stories all running together for me, which is not necessarily a complaint. And so I think what we're going to do, I definitely like these more than Tunnel of Bones. I think where these are the majority of these are gonna land here behind Legends and Lattes. I'm already wanting to move this. We're gonna just move that up, and then the exceptions here are going to be Fairest and Stars Above. And so Fairest is focused on the evil queen, and this is kind of like, this is a story that like leads into the book Winter, kind of explaining the evil queen and what's gone on there, and honestly did not necessarily feel it was necessary. I think this is a B for me. We're going to put it here below. I'll put it above Children of Dune. And then Stars Above is a collection of novellas where each of the novellas roughly takes place either as like a prequel to one of the books or as like a sequel to one. And so they kind of build on those different things. And so like it's a collection of 9 different stories. It's like The Keeper is a prequel to everything. Glitches is a prequel to Cinder. Queen's Army is a prequel to Scarlet. And then overall, I liked this more than Fairest, but I don't think it necessarily holds up compared to the other ones. I think we're going to put this as a higher B. And yeah, I'm pretty happy with that as a placement. So next up, we have First Lie Wins. If you ever want me to get a book that you think I would enjoy, you just got to tell me it is like The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, because that's exactly what happened here with First Lie Wins. So my sister-in-law had read this book, and at like a family gathering, she was like, "Hey Cameron, I know you really like Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I think you will really like First Lie Wins." And so that was the pitch, and I was in, and plot twist, I really enjoyed this book. And so this is a kind of like spy mystery story. So not necessarily dealing with the same themes as The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue in that sense, but like it is an entirely modern work about this person. And here's like the initial description of like Evie Porter has everything a nice Southern girl could want: a perfect doting boyfriend, a house with a white picket fence and a garden, a fancy group of friends. The only catch: Evie Porter does not exist. And so it's about this person who is like faking this identity and doesn't know why, which I think is another fun twist of like she's been sent on this assignment but doesn't actually know what the assignment is, just that she's doing what she's supposed to be doing. This is going to be our number one in the A category for now. Actually, no, we're going to, again, if it makes you think of Invisible Life of Addie LaRue and that makes you think of me, it's probably an S tier if I actually enjoy the book. And so we're going to put it here above Next. And yeah, definitely a big recommendation there for me. So next we return to the world of comic books with Generation Hope. This is a book that I had picked up like on sale several years ago. I think I had read it when I got it. And this is a collection of Storygraph doesn't actually have what it is collecting. Cool. So this is a collection of comics that's after M-Day, so after the No More Mutants. This is about mutants like returning to the world, and then it is about Hope Summers as her and what is left of the X-Men go and start trying to recruit these new mutants and save them. And so it's a cool story. It does not necessarily hold up IMO as much as like House of X, Powers of X, which is like this super defining story, I think. But it's a fun read, and I definitely enjoyed it. I really like Hope Summers. I was talking about this with Varoth over in the Madbird Discord. Of like, I really like Hope Summers, and I would like to read more comics about her because I think she has a very interesting like story and power set. And so I do like that. This is going to land as a B for me. We're going to put it, I think we're going to put it here above Dungeons and Drama. And yeah, I think that'll be a good place for it. And then we already talked about Deadpool. Okay, next up we have Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. This was another First Geek Book Club. It was the first book club that we did that we actually split into 2 separate months, where for the first month we read the first half, then for the second month we read the second half, because this book is extremely long. The audiobook is 32 hours. I believe it's somewhere around like 700 pages for the written book. Let me see what it is. Oh, it's over 1,000 pages for some of the editions. Yeah, and then there are some editions that have like almost 800 pages. And so, as I said in that book club, I'm sure there is a different version of Cameron that will read this book at a different time and will find it very interesting. That version of Cameron, though, will never pick up this book. I don't think this book is interesting in like a broad way. I think it is extremely slow. Susanna Clark also wrote Piranesi, which I think deals with some like similar themes, but I think handles them much better because it's not a 800-page book to get through. Jonathan Strange, who is like the titular character, from what Shanine said, doesn't even show up until over 100 pages into the book. And so like one of the things that I brought up before is the idea of like most books are either 30% too long or 30% too short. Basically, do they leave you wanting more? Do they leave you wanting less? I think each of these sections, like the two halves that we read, are like 50% too long. I think if you were to cut down this book to being 400 pages, it like could have been snappier, because there are like parts, especially towards the end, that I think are really interesting. But like, man, it is not worth the journey, and the juice is not worth the squeeze. It's not worth you can lead a horse to water. It's not worth whatever. It is a long walk for a short drink of water, and it is not worth it. All of that said, V.E. Schwab has said that this is like one of the super impactful books, and means a lot to her, and she wrote the foreword for the newest edition, so I am probably wrong here. This is a D for me, though. I do think it's better than Life Death, just as that collection, but like, this is a book that like I think I would have enjoyed if it was like 400 pages, but being 800 to almost 1,000 pages, depending on your edition, it is definitely not worth it for me. Yeah. Next up, we have The Near Witch by V.E. Schwab. This is actually Schwab's very first book. And so I went and did the audiobook, which has a really cool introduction by Victoria herself, kind of talking about this book, or kind of as like a reading of like her like foreword for it, where she talks about how like when she wrote this book, it was like she wanted to see if she could put like a full story to page. And then it is a story that like now kind of, as she has become a more popular author, people have like actually cared about this story in a way that they didn't care about it when it first came out. And so, Panda Boy, how are you doing today? We are chatting about books, the books that I read this year. And so, yes, I did read 57 books this year. Highly recommend going to your local library, get a library card, and check out what you can get there. Because, yeah, of these, I mean, there's definitely a handful that I do like physically own, but the majority of these are audiobooks and books that I got through the local library. So definitely recommend. And so you read 1.5, like that was me, before I joined before we started the first Geek Book Club. I was like maybe reading a book or two a year. When it came to like fiction and stories, when I was a minister, I read a lot of things that had to do with like church, but like when it came to things that like I wanted to read, I never really read. And so us starting book club was a really big thing for me there. You bought like 7 books on Amazon that you intend on reading at some point. Dude, definitely. My recommendation is set aside 30 minutes and just read. And then don't push it. Like there's definitely times where I have read books, like I've like had to force myself to get through a book that I just like wasn't super interested in, and that kind of killed my joy of reading. But if you can just like find 30 minutes where it's like, you know what, I feel like reading a little bit, definitely recommend there. And if you like any of those 7 books, send them my way as a recommendation. Like send me the titles. And then I also would recommend, once we finish our tier list, if you are interested in new books, would definitely recommend looking into the ones that we have in those higher tiers. So The Near Witch, it's a really interesting story. One of the things that like, as I've tried to 100%, Schwab's work is like you get to see so much of like the themes that she builds into these different narratives kind of connecting to each other as she like builds out her repertoire. And so it's interesting to see like where it all began with the Near Witch of like, which is like a pretty small story as far as things go for her. And yeah, it's a very interesting, very quick read. We're going to be adjusting Stars Above and Fairest. I think we're going to put this below Candela. We're going to move Fairest down to the bottom of B and Stars Above to below Bridge of Souls. We're gonna make that shift. You saw Nosferatu last night. Can't stop thinking. Was it scary? Like, is it a scary movie? Like, am I gonna get spooked too much? Our next book is Slaying the Dragon: The Secret History of Dungeons and Dragons. So this is the history of TSR, Tactical Studies Rules, the original creators of D&D, kind of leading through the purchase of TSR by Wizards of the Coast. And so this was another First Geek Book Club book. There are some scary scenes. It's mostly just suspenseful. See, I like suspenseful. I do not like scary. It might be like a watch it at home with the lights on once it hits streaming services. So we read Slaying the Dragon, and overall, I think this is an interesting book. The author is like 0% unbiased, Ben Riggs. This was a question that like Shanine asked us of like, do you think the author succeeded in being unbiased? And I'm like, I don't think they're even tried. And so it's very much written as like a fan, and it's kind of them talking through a bunch of stuff. It's a pretty well researched like biography of this history, to the point where like there are some like major misses in the book, but it feels like misses that people didn't want to talk about. Like there's a specific person who was like one of the long-term CEOs of TSR, who just like refused to answer questions. And so there would be a lot of insight that she would have been able to bring, but if she would have been able to answer those, but they did not feel comfortable doing that. So like that kind of leads to some of the holes, and those kind of get called out in Riggs's story. Let's see. Let's try and see if there's anything else. I'm reading through skimming through the description. And then if you are a TTRPG fan, or especially a fan who's interested in Dungeons and Dragons, I would definitely recommend this book. I don't necessarily know if you would find this interesting otherwise, which, I mean, with a name like A Secret History of Dungeons and Dragons, like, makes a lot of sense. And yes, I do think you'd find that interesting. I found it, one of the things that specifically I found interesting was because one of the things that Riggs talks about kind of through the people that he researched was, or the things that he researched was like the edition wars that have gone on, as like fans haven't wanted to change editions between the various parts, as well as talking about like why TSR, and for some of the same logical reasons, Wizards of the Coast does separate editions of the game. I do think it's very interesting to have been reading that as we are going through that with D&D 2024. So yeah, I do think that is pretty interesting. Also looking at this list again, we're going to bump up Prayer for the Crown Shy. So Slaying the Dragon, I think we're going to put this in B tier. It's going to go below Bridge of Souls, above Stars Above, kind of with the caveat that like if you're really into D&D or really into tabletop RPGs, maybe a higher rating for you. And then if you are not into those things, probably a lower rating. And that's going to kind of just be the thing. I would be interested in a follow-up that looks at like the Wizards of the Coast side, but I have a feeling it would be even harder to actually get that story. And so next up we have a collection of 2 books, which I believe the third book is on the way. So this is Legendborn and Bloodmarked. And so these are by Tracy Dion. Oh, I guess I should have been saying more authors' names. That's my bad. As we went through these. And so this is an interesting take. It's very like Percy Jackson, Harry Potter, like that style of story. With the exception that like this is like Arthurian legend focused. And so the idea is that within people's blood, like this magic has been passed down to where there are people that are like the literal scions of the Knights of the Round Table. And so this is like a secret society that is fighting off demons and trying to keep the general world safe. And then this follows the main character named Bree, who is African American, and then so it brings in some like interesting difference here for that side of the story that I think is not present in a lot of the other like YA focused stories like this, and I think that adds a lot of very interesting storytelling. And then these are a set of stories that again are like literally back to back, if I remember correctly. I feel like the last scene of Legendborn is like the first scene of Bloodmarked. I could be wrong there. But these are both very fun books that and I'm definitely looking forward to the third one, which I believe comes out in 2025. I don't know if that is like actually confirmed, but first published 2025. Yeah, called Oathbound. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. These are A's for me. I think I liked these more than the Cinder Lunar Chronicles series. We're going to put them up here together. Again, I'm going to take the Coward's Way Out and group them together. And so, and then we have another set of 2 stories. I believe this one, though, is a duology of This Savage Song and Our Dark Duet, both more Schwab books. So let's go there. And so this follows the idea of actions have consequences, and in the world here, those consequences are like demons spawn into the world. So if you do like a heinous crime, that creates a demon, so the people in this world are trying to like live with that balance. The majority of these books takes place in like a single city. And is about how those people confront those differences. And then when you go, there are scenes in one of the other major cities, things are very different over there. And so I definitely think that that's an interesting like narrative idea of like, this is not just like the world is completely falling apart, but it's like different parts of the world are falling apart in different ways. And so I think that's an interesting like dystopian take on these. And there is a little bit Romeo and Juliet going on here as well. And I do think that is pretty cool. And then I'm trying to think if there's anything else I specifically want to call out for these. I don't think so. Again, we're going to Coward's Way Out on this and group these together. I think these are going to fall after Lunar Chronicles. And we're going to just put them there together. Next, we have The Pumpkin Princess and the Forever Knight. This was our... Shanine like threw me a bone for our August book club or October book club for First Geek, and instead of reading like a super dark book, we read this like super fun light story. This is very much like a kid's book, like maybe like middle grade type book. And so this focuses on this girl who is an orphan, and then she gets kidnapped by the Pumpkin King and brought into this magical world where witches and werewolves and all of these things exist. Shenanigans, of course, ensue, and it's a very interesting take on kind of that idea. And so this is definitely a fun book that like I could definitely see being something that like for its like the target audience of the book. Could see being something where like this becomes like something where a whole bunch of kids have read and then kind of gets cited as some sort of inspiration for them in like 10-15 years once they get older, of like a nice silly book that they all got to read. And so this is going to be a high B for me. We're going to put it here below Deadpool. Just because I do feel like it does a really good job. I'm by no means a target audience for this book, but I do feel like it did a good job for its target audience. Next up, as we hit like probably our final 10, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, final 12, we have The Archived. This is another Schwab book, which Storygraph is saying, oh, there is a second book in this series called The Unbound. Okay. And so I did not know that the sequel had come out for it, but I will have to add that to my to-read list. And so, but this is an interesting Schwab book. This is very similar tonally to the Bridge of Souls series, and so there definitely is some similarities there. City of Ghosts. Bridge of Souls is like one of the specific names, I think. Yeah, Bridge of Souls. Yeah, so it's the City of Bones series. This is very similar thematically of like it's kind of a little spooky, but like it's young adult age targeted, so like it's not actually scary. But the idea is that there are that when you die, basically your body gets taken to this archive, and then things can happen in the archive that like causes people's bodies to wake up, and then when they've woken up, they'll go and they can like try to break out into the real world. And so it's an interesting take on this. It follows a young girl named Mackenzie, who is a keeper, and who it's her job to like keep these souls from breaking out. And so there's a cool twist in this as well that I'm obviously going to not like spoil here. But I do think that there is some like pretty interesting takes on like what this is and what they're doing with this narrative. And so this is pretty fun. Generally speaking, I like this more than Tunnel of Bones, so we're going to just kind of set it there in our categories. Like this is a fun read. I'm looking forward to checking out the next one. And then we are going to return to the world of comics with Miss Marvel, the New Mutant. This is a set of comics written primarily by Iman Vellani, the actress who plays Miss Marvel in the MCU. And it's like her getting to like live the dream. Like she like identifies a lot with this character, gets to play the character, and is now getting to write the character. And so this is fun. It follows basically Miss Marvel dies in the comics and then gets brought back to life thanks to what is going on at Krakoa, because she's actually been a mutant this whole time. So she is not just inhuman, she is also a mutant. And then it also, so then it kind of has her dealing with that side of it as she has to figure out what it means to be a mutant on top of dealing with the other stuff that this character has been dealing with. And so this takes place after the Krakoan story. And so it's like Krakoa as a whole no longer exists by the time these are happening, and the X-Men are underground. And so like this is following her as she kind of has to deal with some of this the anti-mutant stuff on her own. And so I really like these. I mean, I'm a huge Vellani fan. Like I said, I think she is like getting to live the dream. And these are very fun comics. One of the things that I do think is interesting here is like this is 1 through 4 and then 4 through 8 of her comics. And so I do think that it's really it's 1 through 4 of Miss Marvel, the New Mutant, and then the second part, I guess, is Miss Marvel Mutant Menace, 1 through 4. They get collected into the New Mutant Volume 2, though. And so it's like one narrative across those two separate like mini arcs. And so one of the things I think is interesting is it kind of like delves into like her powers from the MCU and why they are different, which I think is really fun. I will say one of the things that I wish there was a bit more of in this is that we got to see Miss Marvel actually like interact with the X-Men more, besides just kind of like popping in to talk with them. Like I would really like to see her have some more like hijinks with the X-Men characters, even though that may be happening in a different book, and then this is just the book that's focused, or these are just the books that are focused on her. But I would kind of like to see her out and about a bit more. So these are going to land as A's for me, and I'm trying to decide. Oh, I will also say, for the shout out Panda Boys in chat, there is a specific thing that happens in the second set that I think is super interesting and is 100% going to show up as a side quest in our campaign. And so I'm not going to go into too much details of what it is for people that have read this. If you know, you know. But there is some really interesting stuff that happens here, and I'm very much like interested in like pulling that in. And so these are going to land as an A for me. I think I'm going to put them below Legends and Lattes. They're both a very fun Miss Marvel story. And so next up, we have Instant Karma. This is from Marissa Mayer, who is the person who wrote the Lunar Chronicles. This is a young adult contemporary romance about a girl who is suddenly gifted with the ability to cast instant karma on those around her, both good and bad. So this character gets this ability. Her name's Prudence. Gets the ability to like basically activate karma, and then either a good thing will happen to this person or a bad thing. And it's kind of an interesting story about her coming to learn that like just what you perceive is not always accurate. And so this is a fun book. There is a sequel to this that I have not started that is focused on her brother. And he gets like the power of being luck basically. And it's on my list to get to for 2025 just to kind of complete the series. But I have not had the chance to get to it yet because I ended up getting into other books. And so this is an interesting one. This is probably a B for me. Where do I want to put this? I think I'm going to put it here above Slaying the Dragon. That feels good to me. And then next up, we do have another collection. These are the Hickman X-Men comics. And so Hickman is the person who wrote House of X, Powers of X, kicking off Krakoa. And then these are the X-Men comics that take place during that time period. And so I believe this is like the first 18. So it's 1 through 6, 7 through 11. Then I want to say 12 through 16, 12 through 18. I do not have it behind me. And so I think roughly the first 18 comics that take place in the X-Men during the Krakoan era. These are really fun. I like these a lot. We've kind of had this throughout of like, I haven't told the specific story, but like X-Men are like why I'm a Marvel fan. Like 90s X-Men especially was like a huge part of like why I like superheroes. And so while I have like read other X-Men comics before, this is like one of the first times that like as an adult I have returned to those stories, and so or those characters in comic book form. And so this is really fun, and I like this. I like the conceit of Krakoa. I like this idea of the resurrection and kind of what that represents. And then I kind of like this idea of them trying to carve out their place in the world. Broadly speaking, I do think Volume 2 is a lower point here, but that's kind of setting up what pays off in the third volume. So like, and it's like, so probably like one of the like, I don't want to say worst comics in Volume 2, but that makes it sound bad, but probably one of like my least favorite comics in Volume 2 ends up like leading into one of my favorite comics in Volume 3. So I really liked that we kind of got the payoff there of like a story that was like, okay, but what is even happening here? We then get paid off in a very cool way. And so, again, though, with that, I'm going to once again, Coward's way out this. And I'm going to put them loosely together. I do think we're going to do some shuffling before we actually like officially finalize our list, just because if everything's an A, nothing's an A. And so, I think this is going to land. I think I actually literally might just land this behind Miss Marvel. And so, and just kind of land them in that clump. But yeah, definitely recommend. They're very fun reads. And then Final Five. So, A Study in Drowning. This is a book that was actually we had discussed as being one of our First Geek Book Club books. We ended up reading the next book instead. But I just needed an audiobook to listen to. And so I picked this one up for my commutes while I read the next book actually physically. And so this follows an architecture student named Evie Sayer, who has won a contest to rebuild the home of her favorite author. This is a fantastical book, unless it's not in our world. There's a mystery that goes on here, and there's kind of hijinks and that kind of stuff. And there is kind of this take on consequences of kids paying for the consequences of their parents and what that looks like. And then there's a little bit of while not bad, there is definitely some stuff here that if you're interested in, I would recommend taking a look at the content warnings for this book before you go into it. I have not necessarily made that caveat with anything else that we've read today, but this is something that I would take an eye on those, or keep an eye on those if this is a book that you're interested in, because I do feel like there are things here that you may not anticipate, and then as this character kind of goes through things, and yeah, so I would keep an eye out for those. This is another A for me. Again, because everything's an A. I think this is gonna place above A Psalm for the Wild Built. And then so all of this is gonna get shifted around. But okay, so next up, we have Critical Role Bells Hells What Doesn't Break, a book that has 3 different titles. This is from Cassandra Cow, and is Laudna's backstory from Critical Role Campaign 3. So it's basically what is this character up to leading up to Campaign 3. This was the final First Geek Book Club that we did for the year. This was our November book. And my biggest complaint about this book is it is exactly what it is. It is a backstory book about this character. And because of that, I feel like there's not necessarily a lot of suspense. Maybe this is also me being a little biased, because Laudna is not necessarily my favorite character from Campaign 3, in the sense, and especially I really liked Keyleth, and I liked Bo as Marisha's other characters. If I'm remembering Campaign 2 correctly, I never finished that one. But from the Critical Role abridged that I've been going through so far, Laudna is just not necessarily my favorite character in that. And so I kind of would have rather this been focused on a different character, but, for what it is, I think it is a good read. I think you really need to be a Critical Role fan to want to read this. I would very much struggle recommending this to someone, if they were not a Critical Role fan. But with all of that said, I do think that it is something that is generally an interesting read. And so that's going to land it kind of in our definition of Bs. I think we're going to land this above Pumpkin Princess. No. This is going to land below A Prayer for the Crown Shy. Yeah, that's where we're going to end that book. And then next up, we have Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice from Murderers. This is a book, again, I don't know how this ended up on my TBR. This might have been a book that we had been recommended for First Geek, book club, seeing as Shanine has like left a review for it on Storygraph. So maybe that was how I found out about it. And I like picked this up and went through it, kind of not really expecting much. But it's a story following this character as she owns a tea shop. Vera Wong, she owns this tea shop and is like this old Chinese lady, and like she lives in San Francisco's Chinatown, and all of a sudden one day she finds a dead body in her tea shop, and so shenanigans ensue. I feel like that's like my way of being like, I don't want to necessarily reveal spoilers. That's like my expression for that. And so she ends up going and finding through hijinks, finds people who think they might have murdered the person, and ends up trying to basically figure out who it was that is the murderer, because the police won't do it. And so it's a very fun read. Vera is definitely the type of person that I want in my life. And I do think that this is a very cool story. This is another one that I would recommend looking at the content warnings for, because it does deal with some very real stuff, especially centered around the person who died, and their relationship with the other characters in the book. So this is another one that I would recommend keeping an eye or taking a look at those content warnings, because I could see this being a little real for people. But this is going to be another A for me. I think we're going to put this as our number 4 here. And like I said, I didn't necessarily have too many expectations for this book, but I really enjoyed it, and I think it's a very interesting story. Okay, second to last book, we have The Whispering Dark. So this is Kelly Andrew. We referenced this earlier because she wrote Your Blood, My Bones as well. And so this is like The Whispering Dark is the first book in that world that Your Blood, My Bones takes place in. And the author is writing a second book or a third book, I believe, that takes place in this world. Let me see if Storygraph can like get me there. Yes, I Am Made of Death is her next book that comes out sometime this year. And so I will say for this, so whereas Your Blood, My Bones is set in this one, or mostly on this one like campsite like type thing, and is focused on the smaller group, The Whispering Dark is set at a college, and it's about people kind of discovering the magic in this world and some of the stuff like that. And so it does have some direct tie-ins between the books. Generally speaking, I liked Your Blood, My Bones more than The Whispering Dark. I just found the characters in that one more interesting, but there's a little bit of like the conspiracy side in The Whispering Dark, and like cover-ups and stuff like that, as people have to go and figure out what is going on there. And so I do think that it's an interesting read, even though I did like Your Blood, My Bones more. This is gonna land above the Near Witch, I think, for now. And like I said, we'll do a little bit of a shuffle before we finalize. And then our last one is Spider-Geddon. So this is another collection of like Spider-Verse stories. I do believe that so it's about all the different spider people getting back together. If I'm remembering the broader narrative, the other one that we read is a collection of stories that leads into one spider event, and then this is the next spider event, but I could have that wrong. And so that just was my interpretation of it. Or just as I was reading, I did not look into that, but that's my understanding because they reference a previous event. And so one of my favorite parts about this is it has the Insomniac Spider-Man in it as like a somewhat important character. And so like I was super hyped about that because I really like that version of Peter Parker, and getting to kind of see him interact. And then we also have Superior Spider-Man in this one, which is like Doc Ock taking over. And so I think that is very interesting as well. And then you kind of get a bit of the other big ones of Scarlet Spider is in here, Miles Morales, Spider-Gwen. There's a handful of the other characters that are around. Spider-Punk is in this as well. And so there's a handful of just kind of generally really interesting characters here that it is fun to see. I think that this is a good collection, but I would not necessarily like the problem that I have with this one is a lot of the Spider people obviously like are similar because a lot of them are just Peter Parker. And so I wish there was a little bit more of a difference between some of the other spiders in terms of like who they are and what they're about. Because it kind of feels like it's Superior Spider-Man, like Miles, and then like those are kind of the only two that have like a more unique personality in this. And yeah, so I do like this. I think it is good. I think this is going to land as a B above Generation Hope for now. And like I said, we'll do a shuffle before we finalize our bracket. But yeah. And so, yeah, let's go and do that pass through. And so I don't want to ever set like number goals of like this tier can only be this many. But if, like I said, if everything is an A, nothing's an A. And so we're going to definitely do some shifting around here. So if we're thinking of S is amazing, A is great, B is good, C is okay, D is bad. I think we're going to bump down Fairest Wager, Good Omens, Children of Dune, Stars Above. We're going to bump those down to C. And then we're going to bump down Dune, Tunnel of Bones, The Archived. And then do I want to move down a Magic Steeped in Poison series? I don't think I do. I think I want to leave them in A. I think that's how I want to be. And so, okay, so let's do a pass through everything now. So we have Invisible Life, all of these. I feel good about our S tier. In fact, I could see like this is how you lose the Time War being bumped up to an S tier. I do really like that one. I feel a bit better about our A's now as like our greats. We are gonna bump down a Venom Dark and Sweet, or a Magic Steeped in Poison and a Venom Dark and Sweet. We are gonna bump those down to B's. As we finalize, this makes the categories the same length, which is funny, not intentional. And then like those together, like that. Legends and Lattes, yeah, I feel good about that. Like those. We're gonna bump up A Study in Drowning. I know we like just did that one, but I'm going to move that one, and then yeah, like that. And then here in our B tier, is there anything I want to adjust? I'm actually going to bump up. Do I want to move? I'm not going to move up Deadpool. I was thinking about moving that one elsewhere. This is all good now. Yes. Okay. So I like this as kind of our final look at the 57 books that I read this year. 57 was a lot. We're going to see. My goal for next year is going to, again, be to hit 50 books. I do already have a handful picked out that are going to be the starts for the next year. And then probably as part of 2 different book clubs, that will at least be 24 of the books that I will be reading this year will be books for those 2 book clubs. And so I'm pretty excited to check some stuff out and see what everything is all about when it comes to that for next year. If you are watching this on YouTube after the fact, drop some book recommendations for me in the comment section. Always looking for more stuff, especially if there's anything that kind of fits the vibe for the books that I have here in like our S through B's. If there are things that kind of fit those vibes, please let me know. And yeah, I definitely am always looking for more recommendations And if you do that, give me like a 1-sentence blurb of why you liked the book. Like, what is it about it that you thought was really interesting? And so, but yeah, I think that's all that we're going to have. This is our final stream of 2024. We will be back in 2025 with some new stuff. Should be jumping back into video games as we've kind of taken, with the holidays, taken a little bit of a break from all of that with our year-end recap streams. And yeah, really excited to go through and actually have enough books to go and rate. If we jump back to 2023, like for that year, I read 16 books. So like we definitely had like a massive jump up in the amount of books that I went and read. 2022, this is, I believe, is when we started the first Geek Book Club. Or unless that was 2021. But I definitely like have enjoyed like book club giving me an excuse to read books. And then this kind of being, I had a little bit of it last year, right? I think my goal was to read some books that were not for book club. And then this year, really kind of diving into audiobooks in a big way, kind of being my motivation to go and tackle all of these things. And so, like I said, if you've read great books, let me know what they are so I can go and read them as well. And then, like I said, if you are interested in reading new books, I said this earlier, and I say this every time over on First Geek, go get a library card. And the odds are that your library has access to digital books, be it ebooks or audiobooks. And then that's a great way of going and checking out books without feeling like you have to necessarily go into Audible. And so I really like reading and getting books through my local library. And so go and support that if you can. But all of that said, it has been a great stream. Love getting to chat through some of the things that all the things that I have read this year. Check back next year for whatever it is that I'm going to end up reading. And I hope that you're going to all have a fantastic new year, a fantastic closeout to 2024. And I hope 2025 is great for you. So with that, time to sign off. I hope you have a good one. Bye.